Every day, your City of Tempe staff goes above and beyond to make sure our community gets the best possible services and the most for our tax dollars. But how good is good? How do you measure it? And how do we know what we really need to make progress on some of our most pressing issues? To guide us, we developed a series of goals designed to help us improve our community based on our Tempe City Council's 5 strategic priorities. Reaching for excellence, we are comparing ourselves against the rest of the nation as well as ourselves. Some of our goals will help save lives. Some of them will help us save money. All of them will help us make Tempe a better place. Tempe Accelerates is an opportunity for you to get involved. Hear what city staff and community partners are doing to reach our goals. Your role? You are a vital part of our community. Share your ideas and help us craft better solutions. Ask questions. Be part of the conversation either in person or online. Check tempe.gov/Tempe Accelerates for dates and times of our next programs and collaborate with us at Tempe City Hall. Today, we will hyper-focus on 2 performance measures. Each presenting team will have 10 minutes to share data, strategies, and progress on a performance measure. Then, you will have about 10 minutes to ask questions or offer suggestions and ideas. On the back of your agenda, we have resource questions to help you participate in the conversation. Also included with your agenda is a quick survey with space you can use to include any ideas or suggestions you might have about today's topics. Thank you for participating. Now, let's accelerate.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Tempe Accelerates. This is our first Tempe Accelerates of 2021, our first Tempe Accelerates done in this virtual format using Teams Live, and our first Tempe Accelerates to resume after the pause that we have taken during the pandemic. So I really appreciate everyone watching along, and we look forward to your participation. Tempe Accelerates is an outgrowth of our efforts around strategic management and performance-based measurements and to be a data-driven organization. We have tasked our city staff with executing on a number of performance measures, 2 of which you're going to hear about today. One regarding right-of-way landscape maintenance, and the second regarding tree coverage. As was seen in the video you just saw, each of these will be a 10-minute presentation. During the presentation, if you think of questions you'd like to ask the presenting teams, there is a Q&A feature in the application that will allow you to write your questions down, and the presenters will then respond at the conclusion of their presentation. You could find that feature in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you're asking about a specific slide in the presentation, please go ahead and give us that slide number so we can show it during the response. A feedback survey will be available on our website that you can provide feedback in addition to questions today to our 2 presenting teams. We will provide the link in the Q&A, and we'd appreciate you filling that feedback survey out. In addition, we will provide links to our performance measures dashboard so you can explore other performance measures that you might be interested in. Just so you know, this is our first virtual edition of Tempe Accelerates. So there may be time delays and technical challenges as we go through the presentations, and we appreciate in advance your patience as we work through all of those. So now, without further ado, we will welcome the first presenting team regarding right-of-way landscape maintenance, Sean Thompson and Isaac Shavira.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, everybody. I'm Sean Thompson, Interim Transportation Manager. And right now, I'll pass you on to my phenomenal boss, Isaac.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Interim Deputy Director, Isaac Shavira in Transportation. So we can go ahead and get started. Let's accelerate. Quality of landscape maintenance is one of the top council priorities under the quality of life. A couple of quick facts that we want to share with you today is the National Association of Landscape Professionals states that 91% of people think it's important to live in close proximity to trees or nice landscaping. And also 90% of people who have a yard think it's important to have a well-maintained yard. City of Tempe is no different. So one of the council strategic priority under quality of life is a performance measure, next slide please, which reads, to achieve ratings of very satisfied or satisfied with the quality of landscape maintenance along streets, sidewalks greater than or equal to the top 10% of the national benchmark cities across all demographic categories as measured in our community survey. Next slide, please.
So why does this performance measure matter? Well, first we need to understand how much landscape we maintain in our right-of-ways. We have about 7.5 million square feet of landscape that we maintain by the city, which is about 35% of the landscape out there. The other 65% is maintained by commercial properties or residential properties. So a nice, healthy landscape is vital to our community. It's good for our city, and a healthy landscape is a priority of ours also. So healthy plants and healthy trees provide oxygen. They're like a big giant air filter and cleans the air. The trees provide shade, which helps reduce in our heat item. I apologize for that. And enhances the way the city looks. It increases the property values and it supports many other performance measures with the city. The tree canopy and a 20-minute city. Next slide, please. So what is the goal? Well, by 2041, we would like to have everything revitalized in our right-of-way landscape. We want to improve our rating with our residents on the survey with the quality of the landscape, get out and make them understand more what our responsibilities are and work with our communities to have better landscape out there. We want to be innovative on how we do our landscape maintenance. A couple years back, we redid our contract where we put requirements on certain sensitive items that we do in our right-of-way landscape. Like any spray tech who will be spraying any kind of chemical in our right-of-ways will have to be certified through the Arizona State Pest Control Commission. All our irrigation techs are certified. And we're moving into more modern directions as of right now. We're looking to get rid of the 2-cycle gasoline operations with our blowers and trimmers and move into a battery operational. If we do this, it just enhances the lives of our residents and our visitors in the city of Tempe. Next slide. We gotta remember that we live in the Southwest and we have to use our water wisely. So we are determined any times that we do any replacements or revitalize any of our landscape in our right-of-ways that we're putting drought-tolerant plants and trees in our right-of-ways. So we make sure that we're providing the health of those trees and we can provide, water conservation in our right-of-ways. We want longevity of our plants, so we want to make sure that we're maintaining them properly and taking care of them. And the national average is about 54% approval rate, and right now we're at 58, and that's still not good enough. I would like to see that number around the 50s. Next slide. Around the 70s. Apologize.
So how do we get there based on what Sean just mentioned in terms of baseline data? We want to make sure that we continue to work on enhancing our GIS system to increase a well-rounded inventory of our landscape assets, and on an annual basis, assess the vitality of existing landscape infrastructure to make sure that our infrastructure is well maintained. In terms of our funding sources, we want to continue to look at ways of reducing the costs and expenditures of the program. I know this pandemic has affected all of us in one way or another, and for this performance measure, it has hit us the hardest, and especially in our capital improvement program. As you can see in our chart to the right here, the maintenance costs from an operating versus capital improvement, I want to make sure I'm clear in terms of the distinction between the capital and the operating expenditures. The first bullet there is our capital improvement program, and that is what we use the funding for in terms of revitalizing our infrastructure. And then as part of the revitalization efforts, we want to make sure that we're taking care of our landscaping through our maintenance programs. And that's the second bullet, which is the $430,000 a year for maintenance. But again, I want to point briefly to the graph there that you could see. To the next 3 fiscal years, we're proposing a budget of close to $1 million. And that's important because of what Sean and I have been talking about throughout this presentation in terms of making sure that we're taking care of what we invest in within the public right-of-ways and the landscaping, and want to minimize the maintenance gap, as you can see the red line there, which is the gap in maintenance funding. And so the closer we can get to that, the line, we can obviously reduce the maintenance gap and able to maintain our existing infrastructure. Next slide, please. Some additional baseline data that we have at our disposal, and it's important to share, is, as you can see on the left, the 2019 satisfaction survey. You can see some of the spots are red in some areas and some in the light tannish color. And the improvements that we have done in the 2020 satisfaction survey, of course, has some improvements, but I think that we still have a lot of work to do in terms of revitalizing our 30% landscape that Sean talked about. And those are the areas that are in tan, and making sure that the green stay green. So next slide, please. One of the ways that we share this information to our community, as well as a big resource for us, is our GIS mapping tool that allows us to differentiate the difference between the 30 and the 65% of right-of-way landscape that is owned and maintained by the city, and then the other 65% that is the adjacent property owner's responsibility. As you can see in the light green, those are the areas that are the responsibility of the city, and anyone can pick on the light blue points, and it'll give you some data in terms of what the square footage is and some areas of responsibility that Sean has. In addition to that, it helps Sean internally to be able to track his assets in terms of where our water meters are, valves, and sprinklers systems, or the systems that Sean uses to be able to irrigate the bushes and trees. So it is a good feature for Sean to be able to track that infrastructure. Next slide, please. Some of the strategies that we continue to work on is to make sure that we're updating our dashboard and our information on the data portal so that we're transparent and we're able to share this information to our community. In addition to that, we're also mapping our survey results so that we can continue to make sure that we're focused in areas where we can make improvement based on the survey results that you saw in the previous slide, and continue to make sure that we're moving and trending in the right direction. We also want to make sure that it's important that we work with our public relations team and focus groups as we revitalize some of these areas through our capital improvement programs, that we're involving the community in making these decisions and working with Sean Thompson on revitalizing our landscape areas. In terms of planning and prioritization, we want to make sure that we continue to collaborate with the performance measure under code compliance to assure that code compliance is also a partner in making sure that as we revitalize the 30%, they're working closely with us in voluntary compliance and assistance and enforcement of the 65% of the landscape that's the adjacent property owner's responsibility. Very briefly, I want to talk about the graph there that you see to your right in terms of an acceleration model that we've put together that would allow us to accelerate the program or the model by 2030, 2041. And I know Sean, in Sean's mind, he'd want to accelerate that even further. But as you can see on the right-hand side, year to year, the current funding needed for accelerating to get us to the 2041 is about $14 million. Obviously, we don't want to move in that direction too fast because we don't want to get to a point where we have to maintain all of the landscaping all at once it's beyond its useful life. So a trajectory that's a little bit less accelerated is the best approach. Next slide, please.
So as we move forward, our challenges, Isaac, I would like to point out one thing. Isaac mentioned we do an assessment of all our right-of-way landscape yearly, and we update it. When I do my assessment, there's 5 key things I looked at our right-of-ways and our maintenance for if we're going to do any work in them. The first thing is irrigation. Do we have irrigation? Is it properly functioning correctly? What is our tree canopy out there? Are we have enough trees to provide shade in that area? Is it the right tree in that location? What is the plant material? You know, is there any plant material? How old is plant material? Is it an attractive landscape? Does it look attractive? Is it attractive to our residents and our visitors to the city of Tempe? And what is the ground cover? So those are the 5 key elements I look at when I make an assessment of our right-of-way landscape throughout the city, from north side, south side, east or west of Tempe. Those standards are set in stone. So our number 1 issue is our aging infrastructure. Majority of our landscape out there is 25 years or older. Irrigation lasts normally about 25 years. So we're running across where what existing's out there, we're having trouble keeping alive because the irrigation is going bad. One effect that we do have each year is storm damage, because it affects our budgets. And Richard would be maybe discuss that with you also, because it affects his budget. When the storm comes through, we can't budget for that, and it could actually wipe out our budget for the year. And I also like to talk about the difference from a CIP compared to a maintenance budget. A CIP, I interpret it this way. The CIP is a instant gratification in which we go out and we put a new landscape out there, and we have new trees, new plants, new irrigation, and new granite. Unfortunately, I have never run across a warranty that takes care of that tree and plant for the rest of its life. So that which comes in with the maintenance budget. We have to make sure that we have a budget that's adequately funded to maintain the landscape that we are doing with CIP and what we already have existing. And one other point I'd like to point out is all these wonderful things that me and Isaac's kind of brought up. Landscape is a very heated discussion. Sometimes I've been in some discussions, I'd rather be talking about politics. People have opinions of, some people like a victory garden compared to a natural, and opinions really run strong. So the reality of it, I mean, we could do all these wonderful things. We could revitalize the whole area, and some people just won't like the landscape. Next slide, please.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thoughts, ideas, collaboration opportunities.
Thank you, Isaac and Sean. This is Aaron Peterson with the Strategic Management Office. And I want to remind everyone that we have the Q&A in your upper right-hand corner. You can type in a question and we'll pose that to Isaac and Sean and let them add some more information about your questions. While we're doing that, while we're waiting for that, we did get a couple of questions online when we announced the session here. So I wanted to read that and have them talk a little bit about that. Someone was asking about, our neighborhood was just informed that the city in 2021 would perform landscape maintenance along Warner Road just 4 times a year. Up until now, it was 24 times a year. 2 years ago, a bicyclist was badly hurt with overhanging branches. Could you folks talk a little bit more about that change?
Well, unfortunately, that is true. Unfortunately, through the budget restraints from this last year due to COVID, that's the service level that we could provide this last year. But with the tree issue, that happened 2 or 3 years ago, and we've been aggressively going out to our right-of-ways, identifying branches or trees that might be any hazard. We work with a separate company, which is only specialized in tree work, to eliminate any possibilities of anybody getting injured like that again.
Great. Thank you, Sean. The other question will probably come up for both presentations, in fact, because it asks about trees. Are they desert planting trees? Are they planted where there's a lot of grass and sod and other high water use plantings? So could you speak a little bit about the types of trees that you plant in our right-of-ways and how you balance that with the water needs?
Well, since we started this program, all the trees that we planted are all drought tolerant. It's the right tree, right place for the location. We do have some desert areas, more in the North Tempe area, and will be more desert trees that we will be putting in there. Right where the tree fits into that area, I think Richard will be more in depth to answer further on that question.
Thank you for that. We do have another question that has come in from Seth. Are there ways to mitigate storm damage in any way?
Well, the best way is be proactively doing structural trimming in our trees. There's no 100% guarantee. Everybody's been in the valley for a while, knows what a haboob, and they can come through and make a big destruction. But if we're not out there annually going out and structurally trimming these trees to have air flow through them, there's more potential for more damage. So a healthy program of trimming our trees on a structural basis is one way of issues to help.
Okay, thank you for that. We have another question from Kevin. Can you let us know what percentage of the City of Tempe maintained landscape is xeriscape, and if this style is something we are moving towards to save costs on maintenance and water?
Well, I would say probably about 85% is total xeriscape. And as we're revising all our right-of-way landscape, we're going to the drought-tolerant plants, and eventually at some areas we will be able to use stormwater to take the trees off of any irrigation system and rely on those.
Okay, thank you for that. We don't have any further questions in the Q&A at this point in time. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick it over to Andrew. Thank you very much for your presentation. And Andrew can either ask any additional questions or move on to the next one.
Thank you, Aaron, appreciate it. Just want to say thank you to both Isaac and Sean. I understand the enormity and the complexity of the maintenance of all the many square feet we have of our right-of-way, but I, like many who live and work in this area, can see many of the differences in the changes and the positive changes that you are undertaking in an effort to achieve your goals that you talked about today. So thank you very much for your efforts. Really appreciate it. Moving along, thank you, to our next presentation, as was alluded to a little earlier. We're now going to ask Tempe's arborist, Richard Adkins, to speak to the tree coverage performance measure. So Richard, if you're ready, you are up.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, Tempe residents. I am Richard Adkins, the urban forester for the City of Tempe. And while I'm housed in Parks and Recreation and Community Services, I do work to support all the city departments as needed for any tree-related issue. Now, this performance measure is my primary charge for the city. So let's get started, and we're going to discuss tree coverage performance measure 4.11. Next slide, please. So the actual performance measure under the Sustainable Growth and Development is to achieve a citywide, city and private property 25% tree and shade canopy by 2040. Now I'm going to address this distinction between city and private property as we go through the presentation. Next slide, please. So the goal of the performance measure actually mirrors those goals of the urban forestry master plan, and the strategies for implementation are the same. We're looking to increase tree canopy, replace missing diseased trees, as well as update sparse landscape in parks, rights of way, and all city maintained properties. Doing this will demonstrate the city's commitment to this performance measure, which further empowers the residents, businesses, and organizations, as well as city staff, to collaboratively create and care for an urban forest that actually meets the goal as stated. Now, of course, this work supports other strategic priorities and performance measures, specifically those under the quality of life, performance measure 3.23, which is quality of landscape maintenance along streets and sidewalks that you just heard about. And additionally, performance measure 3.26, which is the multimodal transportation and the 20-minute model for the city. Additionally, under sustainable growth and development, performance measure 4.12, which is compost usage in the city. And that's something that I look to incorporate in all of our planting products, our planting programs. The city provides a very good compost product, and that's something that we need to use more of. And then, of course, all of these are supported by the climate action plan for the city, with urban forests helping to provide heat resiliency for the community. Next slide, please. Now, currently, we have about 26,500 trees in our urban forest in the city of Tempe. Now, these are valued at about $57.6 million if I needed to replace them all, and they provide environmental benefits of $1.2 million on an annual basis. Now, we're looked upon as a leader actually in the Desert Southwest for our urban forestry master plan, as well as our community support and ongoing forestry activities, not only from a local level, but from a national and international perspective as well. But we do have some identified challenges to meet this performance measure. We have past and current issues of right tree, right place, especially as the city develops. And this relates to space availability, urban form of the construction, as well as water conservation measures, with species selection and placement being paramount for the sustainability of the resource. Now, our greatest disparities in urban canopy coverage exist on private property. If you look at canopy map throughout the city, the percentage actually varies between 8% and 20%, depending upon the neighborhoods within our 8 character areas. Now, this is something I'm working to address these equity issues throughout the city, and something I'm going to talk a little bit more along in the presentation. And then finally, deferred maintenance. It really does affect tree health. It increases tree loss, as well as increases liability, risk, to not only vehicular traffic, but pedestrians and facility patrons. And it increases overall maintenance costs as well. I like to get into a nice young tree and do some structure pruning, which actually improves the health, reduces future inputs for that tree, and promotes for a healthier resource overall. Next slide, please. So with this, here's a graphical representation of the projected costs and canopy growth for the city of Tempe. This is a clear statement of a future condition and looking at a vision of equity for all neighborhoods throughout the city. Let me go through this graph for you. On the left-hand vertical axis is millions of dollars, and those are in cost. And so you can see we're starting at the bar there at about $1.3 million, which is the average expenditure across all departments in the city of Tempe for all tree-related activities. Now, the right vertical axis is canopy percentage from 0 to 30, and you can see I have the line there drawn in orange for the 25% canopy coverage goal. Right now, we're starting at about 13.6% in fiscal year 21. Across the bottom, of course, are all the fiscal years moving up to 2040. The dark green line in the middle of the graph represents the projected canopy growth over this time period, and each of the light green boxes represents an annual expenditure for both planting and maintenance as we work to obtain the goal. Now, I want to point out this is only for tree canopy. There are shade structures, bus stops, etc., which probably account for an extra 1 to 3% of engineered shade throughout the city. And this is something I'm working to further quantify so that I can have this number intact. But I want us all to remember that this projection is based on the current inventory and cost maintenance estimates that I've calculated. Trees are not static. Rather, they're biological organisms that interact and respond to the environmental inputs and changing over time. So it is important not to front load planting because this actually provides good age and structural diversity for the future urban forest, as well as provides for needed maintenance and even replacement planting, both of which are significant parts of our urban forestry plan. You know, as more trees are planted, operational costs do increase, but also so does the value and the benefits for the city. I like to refer to trees as a relatively low cost, high yielding return on investment and a community asset to be managed. Now, this cost of planting and maintenance does shift over time. Starting in fiscal year 21, we're sitting at approximately a 50-50 split on planting versus maintenance, which changes over time to about 30% planting and 70% maintenance as the goal is obtained. Now, I consider this representation here to be the accelerated model for the city of Tempe. For without any additional inputs and an urban forestry management team, which I propose here, the cities might only just keep modest gains going with the urban forest and basically maintaining the status quo. Now, this projection is scalable should the canopy percentage goal change, but I want to make a point of saying front loading the planting is not recommended for sustainability of the resource. I mean, that is why I like Tempe's approach to a canopy percentage versus a planting numbers goal. I mean, we can go out and plant 1,000 trees today, but if we don't have the facilities or the maintenance staff and funding in place, tree health and survival is going to be compromised. So the next slides will briefly look at some strategies and potential budgetary considerations. Next slide, please. So urban forestry does not function in a vacuum. As it changes and grows over time, it needs to be reevaluated just like any other asset or resource. So a canopy analysis every 5 years throughout the city is something that is recommended. This helps us to prioritize and engage neighborhoods with a lower canopy percentage so that we can provide for planting and equity issues throughout the city. Now, a goal of mine is some of the lower canopy neighborhoods, I'd like to bring them up to a minimum of 10% by the year 2025. Now, to this end, we have obtained a grant this year to help develop a new canopy map, on which I'm working with our GIS staff, and we're going to overlay community demographic data and develop our own tree equity map. Now, this is going to serve to provide data-driven decision-making for our planting and maintenance activities, and I really hope to have this available by fall of this year. As we move forward on private property, I'd like to see us review some of the policies that drive the tree planting and management there. And of course, having inventory data available to the public can only stimulate interest and encourage participation. And then adding private and commercial inventory data is only going to help us meet our canopy measurement and keep better track of what's really going on. I'm currently working with the city GIS staff to revise our urban forestry story map, which again can energize interest, participation, and just help us to move forward. Next slide, please. So with this goal, I like to look at it in two ways, and that's attainable versus aspirational, with the difference being between public and private properties. First, a proactive management of our resource, and those were the numbers that were driving the graph numbers that we just looked at. That's defining our methodology, determining our planting areas, and establishing community equity. Now, on our city properties, we have approximately 18 to 20% canopy coverage. So meeting this goal with the inputs that were being requested is clearly an attainable goal for the city maintained property. But we really need to look at defining public and private strategies and collaborations to forward the more aspirational part of the goal on on private and commercial properties. Excuse me. We already have good programming, educational programming in place, working with water conservation, and we hope to extend these to more public outreach workshops in the future. So with this proactive approach mentioned, we can serve to model and influence the community, which helps drive more of the private and the commercial participation. And this can also be supported through available grants and perhaps even a cost matching program that I'd like to speak about. Next slide, please. So this feeds into some of the strategies for us to consider moving forward. Now, for the city property, of course, it's a more sustainable approach. The staggered pace planting that I was describing, as well as a maintenance team to help us optimize canopy growth. Now, again, information maps to stimulate interest is what we need to keep track, and then increase collaboration on all landscaped areas within the city, whether it's parks, rights-of-way, multi-use trails, transit facilities, any place in the city working together. So for private property, I think we need to more collaboration with our community development staff on policies, standards, and codes. Been working with them a lot, and there's some really good policies and codes in place. But as the city develops and grows, we need to revisit those from time to time to make sure that we can keep up with the urban canopy as well as the city develops. And of course, building partnerships through grants and workshops and other opportunities like our citizen forestry program only helps to promote the goal. Next slide, please. So some budget resources and planning for us to consider on city property. It's basically establishing our staff and resources to maintain our maturing trees as well as our newly planted trees. Now, Parks submits capital improvement for all of its parks when they're doing work to help meet that standard of 25% on city maintained properties. And of course, this year we're putting in some supplemental requests for staff that will serve not only parks, but can help other city departments as well with tree maintenance needs. Now, something that we've put into our CIP budget is some operational funding for new trees. I've estimated it's about $80 per year maintenance cost for trees within the city of Tempe. So over time, as those add up, we can convert some of those operational fundings into full-time employees that can help support our maintenance staff. Right now, I'm looking at about 850 trees that equal one full-time employee for tree maintenance staff. Next slide, please. Now, a little bit different considerations of budget when it comes to private and commercial development. You know, for private property, we do have the Marion Quarter Neighborhood Grant Program, and this year we've added a new tree planting opportunities for communities. I look forward to working with the neighborhoods on these opportunities. I think a cost match program where the city and private individuals work together with the city, you know, providing some technical expertise as needed could help us plant more on private properties. And of course, just creating our more robust tree care workshops and citizen forester program just helps promote the whole deal. Now, with construction and development, I think we need to do the continual review of our planting ordinances and codes. And maybe we need to look at some more code enforcement opportunities, that this helps maintain the healthy tree canopy after our construction projects are completed. Tree protection standards is something I want to push forward. That's something we're looking incorporated in all of our park construction activities presently, and it seems to be working quite well. So moving these tree protection standards for all construction and perhaps setting up a tree banking type of opportunity. There's where some projects where trees are removed and perhaps there's just no place or no space for replanting. Maybe we can develop a system to capture the canopy that was lost by funding a tree bank, and then these funds can then be available for private or public planting to help maintain canopy within the neighborhood where the trees were lost. So next slide, please. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to provide this information and an overview as we move the performance measure forward. And so I'm happy to address any questions and welcome your thoughts and suggestions at this time.
Thank you, Richard. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. So before I read those, again, I remind you that we probably have another good 10 minutes. So if any questions occur to you or any suggestions, please feel free to type those into the Q&A, your upper right-hand corner of your screen. First question, Richard, is what effect would this canopy growth have on the city's water conservation goals?
Now, that's a very good question. Thank you. You can work with your species selection depending upon your location and the form of your development. You can easily work together with the creating canopy and your species choice, as well as working your water conservation goals. I see the two as very compatible. It's not necessarily water usage, it's water management. So if you're managing your water with your planting and starting to wean your species off as they become established, then I think the two are very compatible and we can move forward.
Thank you. Next question, what sort of policies would help drive canopy expansion on private property?
It's very interesting. I think that's something we need to explore is, sometimes HOAs have, I don't want to say, requirements for certain types of trees being planted and number of trees to be planted per property. I think we can work together with perhaps this cost match program to provide provide an opportunity for private property owners to work in tandem with their neighborhood, their community, and with the city to plant and help maintain trees on their property in a proper manner.
Thank you. Next question is from David. How does urban forestry in Tempe compare to natural ecosystems in our region? How can Tempe promote a healthy and biodiverse urban forest?
Thank you for that question, David. It is very much compatible. As you know, the Sonoran Desert is one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world. And as the city develops, because we do have this urban interface, right? So we have our natural lands as well as the city being built out and people moving here. So you have that interface of the native landscape or native forest as well as the human component. So that's why it makes urban forestry. That was my whole idea behind staggering out the plantings so we can have different age structures throughout and different species diversity as well. So that helps maintain a sustainable urban forest for the benefits of our residents and our visitors throughout Tempe's development.
Thank you. And then we'll go back to the questions that came in online that Sean had responded to for our right-of-way landscape. Could you talk a little bit about what percentage of trees in Tempe are desert appropriate that do not require excessive water? And then the other was asking about trees planted in grass areas with lots of turf that require that type of watering as well.
Okay, very good. Good question. And I wanted to define desert appropriate. You can look at that a couple of different ways. You look at our inventory, I said 1,500 trees. Now, about 33% of all of that inventory are native species. I mean, native to the desert Southwest and the Sonoran. There's another 26% that are basically considered drought tolerant. So we're looking in the high 50s, 58, 59% of trees that I consider drought tolerant and native. that will work very well and grow well here in Tempe. Now, there are additional species which I consider, quote, desert appropriate, unquote, depending upon the location. Now, that's just, how you look at the urban form and where you're planting them. So there's probably another 10 or 15% of those species that I would consider available for planting depending upon where it is. Now, you've got to remember that a lot of tree species have been planted in the past as Tempe developed. We have over 100 species currently in our inventory. And, a lot of these trees that, were planted back in the 30s, 40s, 50s help define some of our character areas. Now, while some of these might not be considered desert appropriate, they have been cared for and they do contribute to our environment. Now, most of those are on private property, of course, and not on city maintained property. As for trees surrounded by turf, that's percentage I do not know exactly, but I guess it would include the golf courses, sections of our parks, and around a lot of our facilities. I can say that approximately 20% of our trees are located in our preserve area, which of course has no turf grass. And there's another 40% of our trees that are located along our multi-use trails, in our rights of way, in our transit locations, and they also have no turf grass on them. But you've got to also remember that we're matching species for location and with the intended function of the site. We do have a number of sports facilities and recreational areas other than golf courses to which we provide these amenities for residents and visitors. I mean, a soccer field is turf. And so, some of these areas we need to do and maintain, and desert species are not always appropriate, like for their, because of their spines and thorns and prickles, they're not always appropriate around, say, a playground facility or near a sports field, or maybe along certain types of rights of way. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're looking at appropriate species when we're planting in the valley. And this is something that I really look at when I'm putting a planting program together to make sure we're getting the right tree in the right place.
Thank you, Richard. Those are all of the questions that we have at this time. So with that, I will remind you that I'm posting on the Q&A the site that you can go to complete the survey and give us feedback about today's presentation, both the quality of the presentation and information, and also the technology that we're trying to use. And as Andrew mentioned at the beginning, this is our first foray in doing this, and so thank you for your patience with that. You can also find a link there that shows future sites, which Andrew will talk about future sessions in just a moment. And then lastly, I'll post where you can find the dashboard that tells you more information about other performance measures that we have. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Andrew. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Aaron. Before you go, Richard, I had a question as I was listening to your presentation. For residents who are interested in doing their part potentially to help further the goal, we know a lot of Tempe is made up of private property owned by residents. What's one thing that you would say to them that they could do that could help further this goal to create a sustainable urban tree canopy on their own properties?
Now, thank you, Andrew, for that question. One thing would be just to go ahead and plant a tree. Any type of green vegetation does help with our urban heat island effect, which we have as the city develops. But just planting one tree, it could be a flowering tree, a fruit tree, a shade tree, any size of tree. There's many different sizes, shapes, and statures that you can fit on any types of piece of property, even maybe on a patio tree. There are certain species that are very conducive to putting in a container that can still provide, the environmental benefits of trees and just help out in our overall environment. And if they wanted to contact me for some tree species choices, I'd be happy to provide that information.
Terrific. Thank you, Richard. And it should be noted that you are Tempe's first urban forester. We very much appreciate the work that you've done in the short time that you've been with us, and look forward to continuing that good work in furtherance and acceleration of this very important performance measure. So thank you.
And Andrew, if I may jump in, we did get two more comments, one comment and one question. And since we have time, if I may read those. First comment comes from Kathy. Please be aware of and prepared to inform property owners that deep-rooted trees cannot be installed in public utility easements or close to the city water and sewer lines. So that's certainly great information to have. And then Bonnie sends in a question. Richard has done a great job as our first urban forester. Along with Sean's work in the right-of-way, we have a strong start on our canopy coverage. How can we kickstart the citizen forestry program?
All right, I can address both of those, Kathy. There's a very good point. There's always, you got to look at underground utilities when you are planting, and your species choice is, again, extremely important. I'm emphasizing that, and I am happy to work with private owners and make species suggestions depending on their property, because every species has a little bit different rooting structure, and it also depends on how you maintain it and nurse it along. So that's a very good point, Kathy, to keep in consideration. And Bonnie, as far as our Citizen Forester program, well, once we get past a lot of our quarantining opportunities, and we can actually get back together and do a lot more face-to-face training where people can get out in their community and the champions for the neighborhood can get out and talk with everybody, that's going to really push our Citizen Forester program forward. We have the information here, we have the curriculum, and we're just ready to go with that. We're going to start with just some basic online tutorials, but then we hope to move that forward later in the year as we can get back in person.
Thank you, Richard. And those are our final questions. So I will turn the microphone back over to Andrew. Thank you again.
Thank you. And I want to just once again thank Richard Adkins for his presentation. And also thank you to Sean Thompson and Isaac Shavira for presenting on right-of-way landscaping. I know the effort, the time, and the work, and the other individuals who support the presenters in their presentation. These things don't happen overnight or by accident, and I appreciate all the teamwork and just hearing the expertise today, and I know our residents will feel the same way. So thank you so much for the presentations today. And thank you to everyone who sent in comments and questions today as well. We would again encourage you to fill out the feedback forms. Not everybody will have an opportunity to watch this live, but we will be rebroadcast and on Tempe 11, and will also be available on our website for viewing. And when that occurs, if you have a chance to do that, by all means, fill out the feedback form. I know that the teams will be interested in getting your feedback on a continuing basis. So appreciate that, and appreciate, as Aaron said, your patience today in our presentation for the first time in a virtual format. We will learn from our mistakes, and we will continue to perfect this as we go along, but we appreciate being able to bring this information to the wider community. Just a couple of other housekeeping notes. The Tempe Accelerate sessions, upcoming sessions, are on the screen. You'll see that our next session will be on February 4th from 2 to 3 p.m. where we will be presenting on Performance Measure 1.22, Pavement Quality Index, or PQI, and also 3.29, Transportation System Satisfaction. And you'll see some other upcoming dates too, and we'll continue to use this virtual live format until further notice. Also, feel free to visit www.tempe.gov/Tempe Accelerates for more information about all of our performance measures and many of the forward-facing and public-facing data that we have collected and presented to all of you about all the efforts that we're doing to push the needle in the positive direction on everything that we do with purpose and measuring the outcomes as we move along. So thank you, and we look forward to your continuing participation.